George II, 1683 to 1760 of England, ascended the throne in 1727. As his father before him, he did not speak English, had little or no interest in the arts, but is remembered for starting a unique custom. When hearing Handel's Alleluia chorus from his masterwork, The Messiah, for the first time, he was so excited he spontaneously rose to his feet in respect for its sublime majesty. In so doing, he set a trend for wherever and whenever that great work was played for well over 200 years. George II invited Robert Walpole, who spoke German, to attend Parliament to listen, interpret, and then to advise him. In this way, Walpole became the King's Prime Minister, the first in England. Architect Colin Campbell and designer William Kent designed Houghton Hall in Norfolk for Sir Robert Walpole. Building began in 1722. Originally, Houghton was to have square pedimented towers, as in the engraving from Campbell's Vitruvius Britannicus. However, domes and cupolas were substituted when another architect, James Gibbs, advised a continental touch for the east front. The entrance hall at Houghton is a Palladian cube, 40 foot high and 40 foot square. The pale stone walls smoothed the transition from the exterior to the interior, and they became a notable feature of all early Palladian halls. This was because on the Grand Tour they had viewed stone ruins in their natural state, not realising the vibrant colours they had originally been painted, had faded, and in most cases had fled completely over the centuries since. The magnificent plasterwork ceiling by Giuseppe Attari, an Italian plasterer, matches the boldness and originality of the design. A central roundel contains the coat of arms of the Walpole family. Architectural pediments surmounted the doors, together with reclining putti. The doors and the entrance staircases were made of mahogany, a timber now being imported in very large quantities into England from the West Indies. The floor is black and white marbles in the Dutch taste. Classical busts of Roman emperors and senators were by English sculptor John Rysbrack. At this time, carving and sculpture were considered far more fitting than pictures in such an architectural setting. The whole effect is one of neutrality, order and calm, paving the way to the entrance of the salon. James Richard's splendid door case of carved and gilded mahogany frames the entry to the salon, with its grand manner, deep cornice cove and fine proportions. It is a triumph of the Baroque style as interpreted by William Kent, who used colour and pattern boldly. Crimson Utrecht velvet, interwoven with gold thread, was upholstered onto the walls and furniture, which was also designed by Kent. A portrait of Catherine the Great of Russia, now over the fireplace, was presented to the grandson of Sir Robert Walpole, the third Lord Orford, when he sold off Sir Robert's great collection of pictures to her in 1779. The idea of the main salon of the house being a picture gallery would be of immense importance in the future evolution of interior design. Kent was the first to dedicate a room to dining in England. The marble parlour at Houghton still contains furniture and furnishings designed by him. In 1733, Walpole's Norfolk household gustled its way through over 1,000 bottles of white Lisbon wine and 1,200 pounds of chocolate, still then very much an extravagant luxury. William Kent set his stamp upon the entire interior decoration of this period. The furniture he developed, known as Kentian, has recognisable features. Massive proportion, ornate carving with scroll supports, a frequent use of gilding, and the use of late Roman classical motifs, such as masks, putti, shells, etc. The salon at Wilton was designed by John Webb, aided by his mentor genius Inigo Jones during the second half of the 17th century. At that time they were already in tune with the Baroque style, and this was some 50 years before Kent and his colleagues. It was stunningly decorated in the French taste, with ivory and gilding, the panelling enriched with carved festoons of drapery, fruit and flowers. In Kent's time, pieces of his furniture were commissioned for this room, where it fitted in perfectly. Gilded vine leaves and bunches of grapes were decorative elements much in use, and tables were set with English wine glasses of lead. They were becoming more slender and lighter, some decorated with engraving or their stems filled with vibrant enamel colours. Once the salon ceased to be used for formal meals, the reason for placing it as the central ceremonial pivot in the house behind the great portico dissolved, and the days of the formal layout were numbered. Promenading in the park fulfilled a promise of accessing French style, as well as adhering to the Palladian ideal of see and be seen. There was an increasing importance for English gentlemen to be cultivated and to be literate. A room was set aside for a library or a bookcase full of books was an important new statement of your status and style. Ostentation was not admired. You reflected the depth of your character and your sincerity by being quietly tasteful and polite in all things. The lawyer Sir Henry Goth and his family were painted at home by William Verrilst in 1741. We know that the bureau bookcase is expensive because it has glazed doors, glass still being beyond the reach of most people at this time. Fashionably elegant pull-up curtains define the windows, while the tea table is quite plain, but it has a pie crust edge, which is very de rigueur. The tea equipage upon it is very stylish, and the chairs have carved cabriole legs, echoing the Rococo taste, the fashionable rage in France at the time. They also have drop-in upholstered seats. The most remarkable possession in the room is the carpet. Scholars have declared it's not Oriental, and one might be tempted to think it's an early example of Axminster, but the painter died in 1752, and Thomas Whitty did not found the Axminster Company until 1755, so in many respects it's still a mystery. Perhaps a clue to its origin is that Sir Henry Goth was also a director of the East India Company between 1735 and 1751, and he might very well have designed and ordered it made in the East. The Rococo style was never as popular in England as on the continent due to the conservative nature of the English. There is evidence to prove certain aspects were admired and incorporated into their interiors. A good example is at Felbury, where the stucco decoration is one of England's best examples in the style. At Claydon House in Buckinghamshire, the doorcase has delightful wood carving, possibly by Luke Lightfoot or Thomas Johnson, and it hovers delicately between the Baroque, the Rococo and Chinese taste, in a design that is unparalleled in an English house, where it always seemed to be about having fun. Artist William Hogarth, 1697 to 1764, delighted in satirising the aristocracy via his Marriage à la Mode series. In his book, The Analysis of Beauty, he attempted to define the sinuous line of the Rococo, with a description it leads the eye on a wanton kind of chase, and this is well illustrated by the handrail on the staircase at Morley, about 1730, and it ripples down 3 flights, ending in a dragon's head. Italian stuccatori worked at Morley, and some of their finest work is the decoration on its staircase walls and landings. The early phase of the revived Gothic style belongs to the cult of the picturesque, in which houses and their landscapes attempted to imitate another ideal by fondly remembering the English Golden Age, when Elizabeth I was on the throne. This new vision was one in which knights and fair ladies lived in castles filled with tapestries, jousted for enjoyment, and then sat down to amazing banquets, brought forth by a fanfare of trumpets. It was a truly heroic and romantic vision. John Summerson, the foremost English 20th century architectural historian, attributed the revival of the Gothic style not to the intellectual medievalism of Wren, nor the emotional medievalism of Vanbrugh, but to work completed by William Kent. Lord Burlington's protege, when rebuilding part of the clock tower at Hampton Court, evolved a flimsy decorative equivalent for the original Gothic. At first he proposed a classical building, but Sir Robert Walpole, for whom he was working at Houghton, induced him to abandon this idea totally and imitate the original Tudor work of the Old Palace. At Esher Lodge between 1729 and 1739, Kent was also involved in the reconstruction of Tudor buildings. He worked at the Courts of Chancery and on the King's Bench at the south end of Westminster Hall between 1738 and 9, as well as the screen in Gloucester Cathedral in 1742. He selected Gothic features that appealed to him, and he arranged them conformably to his classically trained eye. Kent's style in 1736 was described as modern Gothic, and that's Gothic spelt with a K at the end, and praised for its delicacy and whimsicality. Horace Walpole, 1717 to 1797, had been brought up at Houghton Hall when William Kent reigned supreme for Sir Robert Walpole, his father. As Kent did not pass away until 1748, it would be reasonable to assume the young Horry would have come under his influence to some degree. As early as 1736, when he was 19 years of age, Horace compiled a manuscript catalogue of the pictures at Houghton, giving their sizes and names of the artists. This amazing collection was later purchased by Catherine the Great of Russia. Horace Walpole went on his grand tour of Europe with his friend Thomas Gray. When he returned to England, he entered Parliament and constituted himself as a prime observer of his age. "I am a dancing senator, not that I do dance or do anything by being a senator, but I do go to balls and to the House of Commons to look on." Horry has become, over the centuries since, one of the greatest and most endearing characters of 18th century English life. He was certainly one of the most prolific letter writers of his age. Today they offer us a unique insight into the literary manners and the social graces of the period. He knew a great deal and was as infinitely curious about the past as he was about the present. His contribution is that he discovered or rediscovered a certain kind of literary pleasure, for that of elaborating the appeal of history by the imitation of historical monuments. Horry had found growing up at Houghton Hall very depressing. All that classical greatness was overwhelming. As a young man, together with his intimate acquaintances, he became involved in studying medieval and early Gothic architecture, a style that he eventually imposed on his own house, Strawberry Hill. He first acquired Strawberry when he was 30, "I am not far from the Thames at Twickenham," he says. "It's a little plaything house," he wrote, "the prettiest bauble you ever saw, set in enamelled meadows with filigree hedges." Over the next 44 years, he reconstructed the house in his own version of the Gothic style, using no fewer than 10 architects. Murray was not at all satisfied at just designing the house. With the help of his intimate friends, he would advertise and scour the countryside for old furniture. His is perhaps the first recorded instance of antique furniture collecting, carried out mainly because of its romantic historical associations. In one of his letters, he related how Dicky Bateman had picked up a whole cloister full of old chairs in Herefordshire. He bought them one and one here and there in farmhouses for 3 and 6pence and £1 apiece. They are of wood, the seats triangular. The backs, arms and legs are loaded with turnery, and there are plenty of them, up and down Cheshire too. He set up the Strawberry Hill Press, and in his library the design of the bookcases and the chimney-piece were based on medieval tombs and choir screens. He conceived and wrote one of the earliest of all English Gothic novels, The Castle of Otranto. By the late 1750s, the villa at Twickenham had become an object of pilgrimage for the fashionable world. So great was the demand to see it that Horry was forced to print admission tickets. He captured the public imagination when he finally gave in and opened it up for inspection. Its deliberate asymmetry was a pronounced and striking feature, and it fitted quite nicely into the cult of the picturesque genre. Sanderson Miller was a Warwickshire squire with a taste for architecture who built a picturesque thatched cottage in 1744 at Edge Hill, where he also created a sham castle and tower with a drawbridge. The sham castle idea caught on, and he was engaged to build Gothic summer houses and other such trifles for others, including Horry at Twickenham. At Laycock Abbey, overlooking the location of the first major battle of the English Civil War in 1642, is the one he is most remembered for. Sir Roger Newdigate, 1719 to 1806, had a friendship with Sanderson Miller, which may explain his preference for the Gothic style when he rebuilt Arbury Hall. This informed amateur architect was depicted by painter Arthur Davis, holding the plans of the house that engaged his attention for over half a century. In the drawing room, plasterwork tracery was inspired by that in Henry VII's chapel at Westminster Abbey. It may be difficult for us to imagine the styles of chinoiserie, Rococo and Gothic all sharing the same thought process. What they do all explore is irregularity. It was asymmetry and sinuous curvilinear lines that appealed to these men of learning. The romantic view of the past valued a broken arch far more highly than the most perfect, correct, classical Palladian forms. Gradually, real Gothic ruins became collectible, and everyone clamoured to have a romantic Gothic setting in their own backyard. Just as Burlington had done by the second half of the 18th century, many estate owners were designing influential gardens and parks without seeking professional advice. At Stourhead in Wiltshire, for banker Henry Hall, esteemed architect Colin Campbell designed the manor house. It was Hall himself, however, who designed a circuit walk around a lake for enjoyment. It was considered advantageous now to walk in the countryside for the benefits of your health, and a view of Stourhead Garden, painted in 1775, stresses the Claudian inspiration of its layout. Visitors are seen on the serpentine path which crossed the bridge and made a complete circuit of the lake, experiencing a series of planned viewpoints en route. A coach and riders can be seen on the public road, which still until this day runs through the garden below the Temple of Apollo, but which is now entirely concealed by planting. At Stourhead, a miniature pantheon housed a statue of Hercules, representing the human labours which lay beyond this superb Arcadian scene. Damming two streams and linking a series of fish ponds made the lake at Stourhead, and its banks were originally planted with beech and larch, and then underplanted with cherry and laurel. In her temple, Flora the goddess stood facing south across the verdant lawns and flowers, and in this landscape the inspiration of paintings by Claude Lorraine and Poussin are more strongly evident than in any other surviving 18th century landscape. There was also a grotto at Stourhead set into the bank. The most fortunately placed grotto is that of Stourhead, had written Horace Walpole, where the river bursts from the urn of its god and passes on its course through the cave. By the end of the first half of the 18th century in England, the Palladians, we would have to say, finally won out over the Goths. During the second half of the century, they would take complete control, disporting themselves as informed rulers of taste. The Brockman family and their friends were recorded by Edward Hatley at Beechborough Manor in Kent around 1745. Two views are now on display in the National Gallery of Victoria in Australia. In the first, they are depicted grandly in the garden by the lake. In the second, they are inhabiting a classical folly, observing from their position high on a hill the prospect of the countryside. In one respect, they are adhering to Andrea Palladio's principle of to see and be seen. Interestingly, though, their own family motto was esse quam videri, to be rather than to appear to be,